We're all aware of the obvious biological differences between males and females. Males have testes, females have ovaries, females have breasts and are able to give birth, while men are unable to. However, what isn't so well known is that male and female brains have been found to have distinct structural differences, which may result in a range of psychological variances between the sexes. Other biological factors such as hormones, as well as external societal pressures can together cause males and females to behave and think differently. In this video, Binyamen and I will be exploring such differences. Scientists generally study four primary areas of difference in male and female brains: processing, chemistry, structure, and activity. The differences between male and female brains in these areas show up all over the world. The scientists also have discovered exceptions to every so-called gender rule. You may know some boys who are very sensitive, immensely talkative about their feelings, and just generally don't seem to fit the boy way of doing things. As with all gender differences, no one way of doing things is better or worse.
So how do scientists examine brains and determine differences? There are now a number of sophisticated neuroscientific methods which allow scientists to probe minute differences between any two groups of brains. There are several approaches brought forth by advancements in computerized image processing, such as volumetric measurement of brain parts. A region is defined and the computer, working with a pile of slices, calculates the areas of the brain region and then integrates numerically several areas in order to calculate its approximate volume. Statistical analysis of samples containing several brains are able to discover, or not, any differences in volume, thickness, etc. There's also functional imaging, which, using advanced devices such as PET or positron emission tomography, fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, or BTE, brain topographic electroencephalography, researchers are able to visualize in 2 and 3 dimensions what parts of brains are functionally activated when a given task is performed by the subjects. Lastly, there are post-mortem examinations. This is where the brains of deceased individuals are excised and sliced. Modern image analysis techniques are used to detect quantitative differences, such as the number and form of neurons and other brain cells, the area, the thickness, and volumes of brain regions. And what are these differences, you ask? What do these differences do? Well, let's start with the processing aspect. Did you know male brains utilize nearly 7 times more gray matter for activity, while female brains utilize nearly 10 times more white matter? What does this mean? Gray matter areas of the brain are localized. They are information and action processing centers in specific splotches in a specific area of the brain. This can translate to a kind of tunnel vision when men are doing something. Once they are deeply engaged in a task or game, they may not demonstrate much sensitivity to other people or their surroundings. White matter, on the other hand, is the networking grid that connects the brain's gray matter and other processing centers with one another. This profound brain processing difference is probably one reason why you may have noticed that girls tend to more quickly transition between tasks than boys do. The gray-white matter difference may explain why, in adulthood, females are great multitaskers while men excel in highly task-focused projects. Now for the chemistry. Male and female brains process the same neurochemicals but to different degrees and through gender-specific body-brain connections. Some dominant neurochemicals are serotonin, which among other things helps us sit still, testosterone, our sex and aggression chemical, estrogen, a female growth and reproductive chemical, and oxytocin, a bonding relationship chemical. In part, because of the differences in processing these chemicals, males on average tend to be less inclined to sit still for as long as females, and tend to be more physically impulsive and aggressive. Additionally, males process less of the bonding chemical oxytocin than females. Overall, a major takeaway of chemistry differences is to realize that our boys at times need different strategies for stress release than our girls. With all that being said though, keep in mind that these chemicals do not completely control our feelings and actions. They just play a part in it. You may find a really shy or quiet guy, or some women who are more aggressive or tomboyish than others. Factors such as our environment, our upbringing, and our experiences all play a part in the way we act. The aspects of the brains that you may find differ most between males and females is the structure. Structure refers to actual parts of the brain and the way they are built, including their size and/or mass. Females often have a larger hippocampus, our human memory center. Females also often have a higher density of neural connections to the hippocampus. As a result, girls and women tend to input or absorb more sensorial and emotive information than males do. By sensorial, we mean information to and from all five senses. If you note your observations over the next months of boys and girls, and women and men, you will find that females tend to sense a lot more of what is going on around them throughout the day, and they retain that sensorial information more than men. Additionally, before boys or girls are born, their brains develop with different hemispheric divisions of labor. The right and left hemispheres of the male and female brains are not set up exactly the same way. For instance, females tend to have verbal centers on both sides of the brain, while males tend to have verbal centers on only the left hemisphere. This is a significant difference. Girls tend to use more words when discussing or describing incidences, stories, places, people, objects, and feelings. Males not only have fewer verbal centers in general, but also often have less connectivity between their word centers and their memories and feelings. On the other hand, girls tend to relate more of their words and memories to feelings. Lastly, let's talk about the differences in brain activity. Females are more wistful than men. The female brain often ruminates on and revisits emotional memories, unlike the male brain. Males first reflect briefly on an emotive memory, analyze it to an extent, and then move on to the next task. This is due to the cingulate gyrus in the limbic system, increasing blood flow and therefore stimulation in that area. The limbic system is a part of the brain which is involved in emotion formation, learning, and memory. The cingulate gyrus generally links these things. Female brains are also more stimulated when presented with visually disturbing images. In one study, male and female participants were exposed to negatively emotionally arousing images, such as mutilated bodies. Through the use of MRI, the scientists found that during the experiment, the right amygdala was activated in the female brain, whereas the left amygdala was activated in the male brains. But who is to say that this was pre-programmed biologically, or a side effect of males often being more exposed to such images with the plethora of violent video games?
Through in-depth research, science has been able to find distinct psychological differences between the genders. However, for the most part, scientific literature also suggests that these differences are not as great as traditionally thought. It is important to remember that research done on gender differences are based on statistics, and that correlation is not the same as causation, meaning that just because girls are on average more emotional does not mean that being a girl will cause you to be more emotional, and that there are boys who prefer languages and girls who excel in math. In a study conducted at Tel Aviv University, the brain structures of 1,400 individual MRI scans were analyzed and a spectrum of typical femaleness to typical maleness in structural brain features was created. For example, on the male side of the spectrum, we would see a larger left hippocampus. The team then placed the brains on this spectrum based off their features, unaware of the gender of the person which the brain belonged to, and found that there was a great overlap between male and female brains. They found that less than 8% of brains had completely male or female features. The researchers concluded that although on average there were structural differences between male and female brains, that these differences were not a deciding factor on the gender, and that based off an MRI scan of a brain alone, gender could not be reliably determined. Ultimately, although male and female brains do have some structural differences, these differences are not true for all people, resulting in the implication of gender stereotypes to be harmful. It is important to understand that everyone is psychologically unique, and that gender expression is a diverse spectrum, not a one-size-fits-all. As a result, it is important to find out who people really are before acting on gender prejudices.
The brain is a very flexible organ, and as such, many more things should be taken into consideration, such as the environment, culture, societal norms, gender identity, and so on, all of which may have influenced the developmental differences in our brains over time. For example, perhaps the young woman adapted to society's expectations over the course of history that they were supposed to be caring mothers, and hence needed good social skills, patience, and as most mothers would know, multitasking abilities. Perhaps these traits were just drilled into their minds during their upbringing by watching other women, which is a psychological cause. But then, how do we prove that there is a biological aspect to the development of brain differences? The brain is flexible, but it is not infinitely flexible. Individuals who are sex reassigned at birth offer an opportunity to see what happens when a child who is genetically one sex is raised as the other. An infamous sexual reassignment case was that of David Reimer. Reimer was born biologically as a male, but was raised as a female following medical advice after an operation that destroyed his genitalia. The reassignment was considered to be an especially valid test of the social learning concept of gender identity for several of the unique circumstances of the case. Despite the hormone therapies and surgeries, Reimer failed to identify as a female. According to his and his parents' accounts, the gender reassignment has caused severe mental problems throughout his life. At the age of 38, Reimer sadly took his own life. From this example, we learnt the hard way that our sex, which mind you is different to gender, is directly linked to the way our brains think as early as birth. And this is a biological factor.
Also, you may have noticed us use the term male and female brain, but just keep in mind that there really isn't distinct male and female brain, so to speak. You may have brain map A and I may have brain map B, but that doesn't necessarily mean you will be better than me at some things and I in others. We may still both accomplish the same goal whether we use our brains the same way or not, and if need be, the brain can reroute, reprogram, and reuse different parts to accomplish the goal. But it isn't infinitely flexible, and we are tied to an extent to our sex, and no amount of psychology can change that part of biology. In the developing of our brains, it is quite clear that both biological and psychological factors play a part in how different we all are, and not just between males and females.